Hello dear listener, please subscribe to our channel. Enjoy watching. The first spark of suspicion slipped through the cracks in what I thought was our perfect marriage. A flicker of doubt, and I almost brushed it off. My job as a logistics coordinator took me out of town a few times a year, and I always left Lori, my wife, with a detailed itinerary, which flights I'd catch, what time I'd land, when I'd be back. She reciprocated, giving me a full account of her schedule, work events, evening plans, anything that kept her busy while I was away. It was more a habit than anything else, a kind of unspoken ritual of our marriage, one I never thought would become evidence. This time, work was taking me to Chicago for a week, with plans to return Sunday night. Lori and I kept it simple. She'd spend the weekend relaxing and tackling a big project she had going at her law firm, she said. No big changes, no surprises. But on Thursday, the negotiation I'd flown out for took an unexpected turn, wrapping up faster than anyone anticipated. By lunchtime, my clients were diverted by a crisis on the East Coast, and I was left with an open itinerary. I seized the chance to surprise Lori, picking up the first available flight back home, set to touch down in Seattle by mid-evening. From the plane, I tried calling her to share my surprise. There was no answer at home. She was probably at the office, so I tried her work line, expecting her assistant, Mandy, to pick up as usual. Instead, a stranger's voice greeted me, cheerful and professional but unfamiliar. Mandy? Oh, no, she's out of the office for the rest of the week. I can put you through to Mrs. Clayton if you like. I hesitated. Mandy was supposed to be putting in extra hours on Lori's latest case, according to her last text. But maybe plans had changed. I shook it off, leaving a message with the receptionist and figuring she'd call me back. But even after I landed, there was still nothing from her. The cab dropped me off at the house around 6 o'clock, a bit earlier than I'd told her I'd arrive. I was excited, ready to surprise her, except, as I unlocked the door and stepped inside, the house was dark, unnaturally silent. It didn't feel like anyone had been there in hours. No notes, no messages. I felt a small knot of unease, but dismissed it as overthinking. I went through the motions of unpacking, tidying up, threw together a sandwich, and settled on the couch, phone in hand, waiting for her to walk in. By 9 o'clock, my small knot of worry started to harden into something else, something I wasn't ready to acknowledge yet. My phone buzzed. I picked it up, expecting Lori, and finally, there she was. I was just about to call you, she said, her voice sweet but strangely formal. I tried calling the hotel earlier. They told me you'd checked out already? Yeah, I replied, keeping my voice casual. Plans changed a little. She paused. Where are you now? I took a beat. At home, I replied, letting the silence grow a little. Oh. You're back early. Her voice sounded forced, with an awkward edge of surprise. She covered it quickly, but that edge cut through every soft, practiced phrase she used next, how she'd missed me, how quiet it felt without me, how she couldn't wait for the weekend when we'd finally be together again. The words dripped with warmth, but they hit my ears like poison. I could barely answer, keeping my voice even, biting down on every word, letting her talk until she ran out of breath. When she finally hung up, my mind was spinning. I spent a sleepless night replaying the conversation, parsing out her excuses and small hesitations, a dozen little lies. I lay in our bed, the same one she just told me felt empty without me. Suddenly, it was foreign to me. The next day, I found myself on autopilot, restless and on edge. By midday, I couldn't stand the waiting. There was one way to settle my suspicions, though it felt like a scene from a bad thriller movie. I pulled our old SUV out of the garage, the one no one outside our camping friends knew about, and drove to her office. I wasn't sure what I was looking for, reassurance, I suppose, proof that I was just paranoid. But that's not what I found. Her car wasn't there, just like the day before. I needed more than answers. I needed to know exactly who this man was. I needed to see his face. My stomach twisted as I dug through her files at home, searching until I found it, a name, John Sullivan. She'd mentioned him before, always offhandedly, a mentor at the firm. He lived in the leafy, upscale suburbs across the lake, an address I barely recognized. It took me nearly an hour to drive there, nerves stretched thin as I wound through the wealthy neighborhood, watching for her car. Finally, I found the house, tucked away, secluded. And there it was, her gray Lexus parked on the side of the driveway, not a single attempt made to hide it. My pulse hammered, and I felt the world closing on me. I had my answer. I spent that day circling his house, parked nearby, watching the windows with an intensity that made me feel almost feverish. I counted hours, minutes, even seconds, half expecting her to step out at any moment, to put an end to the fantasy I'd allowed myself to believe in all these years. But the hours wore on, and by the time I drove home, dusk was settling over the city. That night, as I lay awake again in our bed, I concocted a plan, an ugly, cruel plan I never would have thought myself capable of. I would make her feel what I'd felt these last days. I'd watch her crumble. My mind twisted with each new idea, growing more vicious, each one more inventive than the last. The following morning, Lori finally came home, her eyes wide with surprise when she found me in the kitchen, calmly drinking coffee as though I hadn't a care in the world. She stammered, her face flushed, questions falling over each other in a barely coherent mess of excuses. She tried so hard to keep control of the narrative, to explain her absence in a way that left no room for accusation. But I gave her none, kept my face blank, unmoved. I watched her confidence slip through her fingers. I was home early, too, I said, matching her calm with a tone even icier. And I have to admit, I spent the last few nights lying awake in that bed you say feels so empty without me. Her face crumpled, and she finally dropped the act, a trickle of tears slipping out as she tried to piece together any excuse she thought would fix this. I held her there, stretching each silent pause, and my mind spun with the inventive revenge I was planning, each idea more satisfying than the last. I would confront her lover, no doubt, make him understand exactly what he'd trespassed into. But first, I'd make her squirm, make her regret every second she'd betrayed me. A dozen schemes ran through my mind, and I saw it in her eyes. She knew this was just the beginning. With every stuttered apology, every desperate attempt at justification, I grew colder, the thrill of her suffering feeding the last of my resentment. And as I finally got up, telling her to leave me alone for the day, I knew there would be no forgiveness, no clean break. Only a slow, simmering revenge that would etch itself into her memory for years to come. Outside, the sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows over our home. But inside, darkness settled between us, stretching out as I plotted. If you leave a comment, tell us what you think about the story you heard. It's important to us and will help us find and tell stories that you find interesting. Thank you for watching us.